Hello, Arseny here. I want to give a quick overview of Radius Tracker. The idea behind the tracker is measuring the entire UI ecosystem of the organization. The typical organization will have many people from several teams working on multiple projects at the same time. Those developers have access to various sources of components. It could be an in-house component libraries, design system being just one of them. It could be third-party libraries, and developers can always build their own components. The goal for the tracker is to detect every single place where every single component is used, no matter where that component is coming from across the entire organization. Here's how it might look like. This is a sample report based on a particular open source ecosystem. This is Grafana. They built a monitoring tool and it has a whole bunch of plugins. In this analysis, we're tracking 300 plugins beside the main Grafana repo. Blue on this chart is Grafana design system, and it's listed as one of the sources in the filter. And gray area are homebrew components. These are components implemented directly in the project code bases. So this is something developers built themselves that's not coming from any component library. Lines at the bottom are other component libraries that are used less often in this ecosystem. And if you look at Grafana on its own, you can see that it's growing. It's growing pretty stably. It's pretty linear growth, but it doesn't mean that the adoption is growing, because if you look at homebrew components, they are also growing, and in comparison, they're growing as fast as Grafana, so adoption has stalled. Talking about granularity, this chart is composed of 1.6 million individual component usages collected over a 5-year period. And you might have already noticed a couple things about this report. First, this report has multiple charts. Because we're operating on a very granular level, we can present the data in various ways. For example, this shows average reuse by source. So Grafana components are used on average about 40 times, whereas homebrew components are used like 2 or 3 times on average. And even though there's a huge number of homebrew components, they're used very little times, very little number of times. Another thing you could have just noticed is I can filter things. So for example, I can show histories of individual components. So a line on this chart is history of usages of individual component, and I can filter this to show you just the alerts. So this will be alerts coming from all sources, and Grafana alert is dominating that list. And if you noticed, when I change the filter, it also updates the other filters. So for example, the proportion chart in the sources represents the final state, the state at the last snapshot. And there's just 30 projects using alerts from any source. So everything else is grayed out. This allows me to show you another, my favorite story that I've noticed with the tracker. And that's a story of a project that has gotten rid of its design system. So it's a particular project and it has several years of history. Throughout that history, they use design system alongside a whole lot of homebrew components. But recently, they have rewritten everything to use Material UI. And I'm sure that if that happened to one of our clients, they would really want to know why somebody did that. And the last thing I want to point out is this report is running from a weird address. It's because it's running from my machine. And in fact, the entire report is just a bunch of files. It means the companies use the tracker, they can host it themselves. It requires no network to operate or even to generate the report. It's open source, so they can inspect what it's doing, and they don't need to worry about sending the source code to someone else. And that's the only tool that does this on the market that also presents meaningful analysis. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.